Hey guys, how's it going? J-Raids here, and hope you guys are having a fantastic day today. In today's video, I want to talk about Sanguine Maria, one of the most awesome and highest difficulty champs I've ever had the pleasure of actually trying to use in Raid Shadow Legends. And if you guys saw my soulstone pulling video, I actually got a 6-star soul for her. And so I thought I'd bust her out and just give her a spin and see what she's all about. I think she has been kind of neglected in terms of actually being able to try to make work within the arena. She is super complicated as a champion, but I hope this video will help you to break it down a little bit and talk about how I think that she needs to be built and where she really excels. Let's start with her kit, because I think her kit is so fantastic in terms of just having an all-around kind of everything it Nuker really wants in Raid Shadow Legends. And for the quality of her kit and her only being a legendary champion, a non-void legendary at that, I think it puts her up fairly strong. So her A1, actually I'll start with her passive, because she is a very complex champion when it comes to it. So her passive is super interesting. She's all about this counting to 3, whether it be taking 3 turns, taking damage and increasing damage in multiples of 3. But every subsequent hit from this champion deals 33% more damage, stacking up to 99%. Resets after damage bonus is applied. Each subsequent hit this champion receives deals 33% less damage, stacks up to 3% or 3 times, so up to 99% in PvP, and then resets again. And then whenever an enemy is revived, revive this champion with 33% HP, 66% turn meter, and places a true fear debuff on all enemies for 2 turns, which cannot be resisted or blocked. So it's very interesting. You have a passive point that increases the amount of damage she deals, decreases the amount of damage she receives, and then she has a revive on a 0-turn cooldown, which is fairly awesome. So she has that survivability, she has that extra damage, and she has a self-revive that doesn't even have a cooldown in her kit, which is fantastic for a nuker. Next, let's talk about her A3, Gorge Scream. Attacks one enemy before attacking, removes all buffs from all enemies. This effect cannot be resisted by enemies who have a number of buffs divisible by 3. Will attack all remaining enemies with less than 66% HP. Grants an extra turn if this champion is under a number of buffs that is divisible by 3. So as a nuker, she has a buff strip. Granted, this will generally need accuracy because it's a little bit hard to make sure your enemies have buffs divisible by 3. But then she has that extra turn mechanic, which helps her to increase her passive damage as she stacks up her attacks, given that you want to make sure she has 3 buffs or any amount of buffs divisible by 3 on her, so 3, 6, 9. But her A2 is really what ties everything together. It's this Sanguine Fisher. Attacks one enemy, will ignore 33% of the target's defense, but will ignore 99% of the target's defense, stone skin, and block damage buffs if the skill is used on a turn number that is divisible by 3. So her kit is all about getting extra turns, and she has a little bit of buff strip, but leads up to this ability, which is an absolute nuke because it just straight up ignores 99% of the target's defense when used on a turn divisible by 3, and goes through stone skin and goes through block damage. And then, if a target is killed, increases the cooldowns of all enemy skills by 3 turns. This effect cannot be resisted if the skill is used on a turn number that is divisible by 3 again. So on top of that, she's able to reset the cooldowns to increase the cooldowns of enemy skills, effectively acting as a lockout mechanic, which is again very powerful. If you combine it both with on a turn that's divisible by 3, you're not only one-shotting whoever you're hitting because you're ignoring all of their defense, you're also then increasing their cooldown, which cannot be resisted. And then her A1 is that extra bit where she has an extra chance of gaining extra turns. Each hit has a 33% chance of guaranteeing an extra turn. This cannot gain more than one extra turn, just refers to that one turn. So she can only gain 1 turn for each hit, but she can chain extra turns together. So she's all about getting these extra turns, cycling her turns in order to get to her Sanguine Fissure, which is her delete button. And then she can go through that Stone Skin block damage, whatever it might be, while keeping her enemy's cooldown in check. And so what I've done for her and what I've found is, even though I have a fairly bad 9-piece Mercurial set, or not Mercurial, but Merciless set, you'll see even though I have a 6-star soul, these stats are fairly mediocre in terms of, pretty low attack. I only have about 6k attack. My speed is pretty low. I have some fairly decent crit damage, but honestly, her damage just really doesn't need to be bolstered by her stats because she's so powerful. Like, so even these semi-mediocre stats, granted I do have a good amount of crit damage, it is still very sufficient at being able to completely destroy enemies. Like, I have a HP ring on here. I have attack, banner, and then it's all 5 stars. And so my Merciless gear is definitely not that good, but it definitely synergizes very well with her kit because, well, one, she has that extra chance of getting an extra turn at a 9-piece set, but it also has this chance of resetting or decreasing random skills cooldown by 1 turn, which allows her to cycle through her abilities a lot faster. Being able to get to her A3 a lot quicker is a guaranteed extra turn so long as your buffs are divisible by 3. And on top of that, I do have the Ward of the Fallen. I do have a 6-star blessing, which does allow me to use this blessing because I am able to replenish my bone shards. And this is something that allows me to have pretty much 1 extra buff up all the time. And it also synergizes with her passive, being able to continue to further reduce the damage, right? This bone armor reduces damage by 30% on top of her passive, which already reduces damage up to 30%, 66%, 33%, 66%. 99%. So effectively, she's able to become super tanky for no real reason. And this also contributes to the fact that she can have a little bit easier time to build around getting the 3 buffs. If you don't have a 6-star blessing, you can't run this. I think it'd be pointless. The other buff, the other blessing that does give an extra buff is, of course, Lightning Cage. But you do need to be a little bit careful about Lightning Cage because when you do have 3 stacks of Lightning Cage, they will just be spent to deal extra damage, and that won't actually count towards your buffs. So that's something you have to be a little bit careful of when you are planning your blessings around Sanguine Maria. Now, I did have some clips that I recorded just ahead of time because I wanted to make sure that I was able to capture some of the unique mechanics of Sanguine Maria. She has a revive in her kit. She has the ability to survive damage in her kit. She has the ability to just absolutely delete in her kit. And she has some super fairly interesting interactions with, just the complexity of needing to take certain amount of turns in order to get the most out of her abilities, so on and so forth, right? And so we are up against a fairly tanky team. I wanted to go up to Plat just to show how viable Sanguine Maria is as a nuker, right? This is her in a team where she is going to be the sole source of damage in my team against one of the most tanky teams. We have Terrace Marichka here with an Odin, right? So we have that extra survivability from their team from just being super tanky as well as the Odin, right? So coming to our turn, we have 4 buffs on ourselves, so we can't really open with the A3, but we are able to get that extra turn off of the A1, which allows us to have 3 buffs and then go into the A3. Now, unfortunately, she is polymorph prone, so that is a little bit awkward. I tried to go in with the A3 for the strip, but then I just got hit with the polymorph, so that was super unlucky. Now, I do want to watch this. So next up, she's going to come into here. So the Ward of the Fallen, she has the bone armor, which is fairly nice. So currently, actually, it's probably not going to be yet, but just keep in mind, right? She spent 2 turns, quote unquote. 1 turn was the extra turn, and the other turn she got polymorph before she could use her ability. Now she's coming up to her 3rd turn. Well, almost. Oh, actually, you know what? Her 3rd turn, she gets stunned. So that's why. Never mind. On her 3rd turn, she gets stunned. But look at this. She has what's it called? I'm gonna go back. She has decreased defense on herself, right? And Taras is coming in with his A1. Look at this. He deals 267 damage on his first hit. That is how much damage mitigation that she really has with both her passive as well as the bone armor. She basically mitigated the entirety of Taras's damage on her A1. And she's a fairly squishy champion. She's an attack-based damage dealer with 9-piece merciless. She has no real way of having extra survivability. And in here, you notice that I miscounted my turns because I forgot to take into account the turn that I was stunned. So this is actually my 4th turn. And so even though I was able to kill the Odin, I didn't get a cooldown increase, right? So, but as you can see, I'm chaining turns here. I got an extra turn from the merciless set, and then I got an extra turn from my A1. But at this point, it's just super hard to keep track of turns realistically. So at this point, like keeping track of her A2, how many turns she's taken, is really just super hard. But the upside is, even if you aren't keeping track of it, she's still ignoring 33% defense and is going to hit absolutely hard. Like, look at this. In this case, I got aspect of Siroth. But because I'm able to cycle through my turns, as well as having the refresh effect from the merciless set, even if I'm not using her A2 on turns divisible by 3, I'm still getting the value out of just absolutely killing somebody with it. And you can see here, I'm just stacking up extra turns. I cycled back to my A2. I think I'm using it like once every 2 turns at this rate. But even though I'm not getting the cooldown increase with the 3rd turn, again, look at that. She took 17 damage there, right? So sorry, this fight was pretty long. But let's just watch it out. And I think that was the main part here. But as you can see, she's able to grind through one of the tankier teams in the arena meta right now, and she's doing it fairly by herself, right? Because she's the only real source of damage on my team. Let's fast forward and see what happens here. So yep, she kills them, they come back up, and she kills them all. Okay, cool. The next one here, I wanted to test her against Solinar, and in this case, do I leave up the Fabian? I don't. So one of the big things is Solinar in the meta, right? And she has in her kit the ability to increase cooldowns. So the question is, can you pair her without someone else who increases cooldowns and have her as a sole answer against Solinar? I think that was one of the things that I did want to get a sense of. And we'll see how this goes. So right off the bat, I paired her with Queen of Hearts instead, just to get the increased attack in, and it's fairly decent at removing some of the buffs. We have Sifi, we have Solinar, and we have Necrit. So right now, you always have to make sure that you're sort of counting the buffs on Sanguine Maria. Right now, she has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 buffs. So I could technically go in with the A3 and get a buff strip, but I think I miscounted for some reason. So I only went in with the A1, but that's okay. Now I only have 5 buffs, and I realized my mistake when I was counting there. I thought I had 7, I'd go down to 6, but in reality I went from 6 to 5. But I get 2 extra turns. This is my 3rd turn. I'm coming in with the A2. I completely destroy this. I want you guys to look at this. I completely destroy this Sifi, right? Sifi, fairly tanky champion. She had an aspect of Siroth, guys. That damage was mitigated by I don't know how much. And look at this. Embrius came in, did 2k, didn't even deal 2k damage. Look at this. So I pop the Sifi through the aspect of Siroth because I'm ignoring 99% defense. That's probably like a 400k hit reduced down to 100k, but it still is able to kill the Sifi. Now it's Embrius's turn, and he goes in with his A2, right? The big smack. Look at this. That's like 1.6k damage dealt to Sanguine Maria. That is how much damage mitigation she has with her passive, on top of having the what's it called, the bone plating. So now we'll go in and continue the fight, but now we're able to decrease the cooldown of Solinar. But granted, our team, we don't actually have that many debuffs going on, which is a little bit awkward. But look at this again. She took only about 400 damage from the Solinar hit. Now we're coming back to her turn. You know, we only have 2 buffs, so there's not really anything much we can do at this point. Of course, I've also lost track of how many turns we've taken, but this is something interesting as well. So I go in for the kill here. I am able to kill Solnar because he's squishy, and then the A3 also hits the Embrius because he's less than 66% HP. It kills Embrius, he revives with his passive. The reflect damage killed Maria, but with the revive, I revived as well, right? And then I place a True Fear. So here, you know, we see her passive in effect as well, being able to come back from the dead and end things out. Now here's something interesting as well. I think it's hard to say with their A1, but I get an extra turn. I don't know if it's an extra turn because of the merciless set or just because I hit the 33% on that one hit, but I was able to get the extra turn. I'm cutting in front of the Solnar because the Solnar doesn't take an instant turn. He only gets his turn meter set to 100, and so I'm actually able to cut in. Oops, sorry about that. And then I'm able to take my turn before Solnar, right? Of course, Solnar gets hidden, but I have enough shield to protect myself. So I think that was another interesting fight where you really got to see Sanguine Maria's damage mitigation. You know, she's tanking big hits from Embrius. It's not a weak hit by anything. She's able to blast through any sort of champion, even if they have aspect of Seroth. And she has that nifty revive, right, which comes in handy. Now, I think this is my final test, and I think this was an interaction that I did want to note. And this was specifically with how her extra turns interact with Nice. And I think for some reason, I just had a different expectation, but you guys are going to see what happens here. So we're just going to go through the motions, waiting to take my first turn here. So I have 4 buffs on Sanguine Maria, but one of them is a 1-turn block damage. So I'm able to use my A1, get an extra turn. Now I have 3 buffs. And now I use my A3 on the Nice. So because I had 3 buffs on Sanguine Maria, I'm going to get an extra turn. I'm also able to quote unquote kill Nice in his form 1, which procs his extra turn as well. But unfortunately, Nice actually takes priority for some reason. And I'd have to go back and look at what it says in Nice's kit and what the wording is. I'm not sure if this was ordering because he's fast or anything like that. But overall, Nice's extra turn was able to cut in front of mine. So that is something you have to be a little bit careful of. I, for some reason, thought it worked the other way, but that is not the case. But luckily, in this case, Nice opened with his A2 instead of his A3. And so this fight is actually going to be a lot easier than it is. But I did get another extra turn, right? And so now it's my turn 3. I use the A3, or I use my A2 again, completely take out the Sifi, and it just increases the cooldown of them, right? And from there on out, I think we can just fairly clean up pretty easily. Nothing too special here, but Crixie again, fairly nice because she's able to provide 2 buffs as well. You really want to think about what sort of champions you are running with her, and then I'm able to, oops, go back here. Oh, what happened? Sorry about that. And then at the end, I'm able to splash damage onto the Marius with my A3 because he is under the 66% health threshold. Although it's hard to tell with this ability, you kind of have to eyeball it. But I was just able to hit both of them with my A3. And regardless, I would get the extra turn anyway, so I could clean up both of them. But you can see how much damage she's dealing, and I don't even have increased attack on my team, right? This is damage purely coming from, 1, her passive, which increases the amount of damage she deals. 2, of course, I do have a 9-piece Merciless set, which gives me additional 35% ignored defense. But this is purely coming from her, right? She just hits hard. She just hits very, very hard. I think I just get absolutely wrecked in this fight because of Stormcaller. Stormcaller is such an insane relic here right now, especially on Marius. I think it makes him one of the strongest champions game, especially in the sense of arena, because he can just dish out these stuns, especially effective against mercurial users like my Galathier, right? My Galathier gets completely wrecked, so I'm just gonna skip past this one. And yeah, that is the last fight I had recorded. But I love Sanguine Maria because she's very powerful. Even if you aren't able to keep track of her turns, at least making sure the first A2 is used on turn 3, I think will go pretty far. You do want to think about how you are planning your buffs around her, because you do want to make sure that you have, you know, divisible by 3 buff on your team in order to ensure that you get the extra turn here, right? Because you can go into A1, and I'm fairly confused on how this works. Of course, each attack, has a 33% chance of granting extra turn. You'd think that comes up to very close to 100%, but of course you can get unlucky. And even with a 9-piece merciless on top of that, getting that 15% extra chance, I have had instances where I use the A1 and I don't get an extra turn. So you do have to be a little bit careful, because and then the A3 is that guaranteed way of getting an extra turn, right? Because on your first turn, ideally you are taking 3 turns, one taking 2 extra turns to set up your A2, which then you can delete someone and lock out the team, right? So ideally on your first turn with Sanguine Maria, you are going to be taking 3 turns with extra turn into A2. And the best way to guarantee that is having one A1 to have the least chance of missing out on your extra turn, followed by an A3 into your A2, or just A3 into A1 into A2, right? Either way. So I have Ward of the Fallen, which means that I need buffs that add up to, I need 2 more buffs, right? In my case, I had the block damage from my Neve, so that's another +1 buff at the start of the turn. And then I had the Volcardiac Heart, which is the magma shield. So that's 3 buffs at the start of my turn if everything goes well, right? But in that one case, I can go back to the video. I closed it. But in that one case, she got enfeebled, so then I had to, I had to place block debuffs on her, which then I had to A1 in order to drop me back down to 3 buffs, right? But you do want to be putting her with champions that are putting out buffs, because if she has 0 buffs, even though 0 is technically divisible by 3, or I don't know, I'm not a mathematician. If you're a mathematician out there and if you can tell me if 0 is divisible by 3 or not, she won't get this extra turn if she doesn't have at least 3 buffs on her. So you do want to make sure that she is able to actually get buffs on top of her in order to maximize her kit. Now, War of the Fallen gives me 1, so I need to try to pair her with champions that give me +2. So for example, that Crixia that I showed has an A2 in her second form that places block debuffs and increased res, so that's 2 buffs right there. From Neve, I have block debuffs plus ally protection, which gives me 2 extra buffs from there. Of course, instead of a 9-piece merciless set, if you don't have access to it, you can run something like a stone skin set, which will give you a +1 buff as well. So then you only need +1 buff, so maybe it's just an increased attack, right? So yeah, so if you run like a stone skin buff and you get the stone skin, you can get a +1 there. Someone like Marius, he gives 2 buffs, right? Seafeed gives 3 buffs. So just depending on whether or not you are able to have, Ward of the Fallen, you want to plan around the rest of your champions in order to have the sufficient number of buffs to get her up to 3. Another option that I was playing around with that I think is fairly interesting was my Ustrid, however you pronounce her name. Where is she? Ustrid. She should be around here somewhere. Ah, there you go. Because she places 2 buffs here with the increased attack and decreased speed. What's also interesting is that she places them for 3 turns on all allies, which is fairly unique because most buffs are placed on a 2-turn duration. So this actually lets her to cycle 3 turns with increased attack up. But as you guys can see, I think increased attack is just completely unnecessary, and she is able to just demolish people regardless of having it up. And so Ustrid herself is just fairly less, has less utility within the arena. And so I think that her kit is just a little bit not as good for what I was doing. But yeah, the whole idea is you do want to make sure you can get her up to 3 buffs, but once you get her going, especially with a 9-piece merciless, getting the cooldown refresh, the resets, the extra turns, she just can take off by herself. I do think that, she's definitely not the best champion. Obviously I have Solinar, so I'm actually comparing her to Solinar, and most of the times, Solinar is going to cakewalk through some of the teams that Maria is kind of grinding through. But I think the quality of champion that she is, for not being a void legendary, for not being a mythical champion, is super high, and she's super powerful. It does make it a little bit tricky if you really want to just use her against Solinar for the cooldown refresh, because she is getting extra turns and getting blasted by Solinar. But you do need, and she does need to have the right support champions around her in order to protect her, to give her buffs. But as you guys can see, she is super tanky, or can be super tanky. dishes out a lot of damage, and can solo carry against teams even in Plat Arena. So I hope this video gave you a little bit of glimpse into how you guys can think about Sanguine Maria, a little bit of a showcase of her skill sets, her passives, and just all around what a fantastic damage dealer and nuker she really is. And I hope you guys enjoyed, and let me guys know if you guys use Sanguine Maria as well, what champions you guys pair her with, and hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your day. Peace out, guys. Take care.